Hello and welcome to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast. Before we get into the episode proper, I do have one question for you, Paul.
Yes, mate.
What the hell?
What'd I do? I'm sorry.
I asked for a fun little chiptune jingle to start our show, and you produced some badass electronic cyberpunk fight song.
Thank you, mate. No, I really appreciate the positive feedback you gave me. Yeah, I told myself, like, all right, just spend 20, 30 minutes on it, no big deal. And I can't do that. I got all obsessive and OCD and
Yeah, but the problem with that is that you've heard this podcast before. You know what I sound like and the tone at which I deliver this show. I have to follow up that theme with my voice. And I'm frankly not entirely sure if my voice is up to the task.
Well, I want you to feel like a pro wrestler coming into the ring, some sort of monster truck rally. Sunday.
which I get, but at what part of any of the however many episodes we've done so far has my voice ever said, this is what a pro wrestler should be like in a podcast? Anyways, it's an awesome song. I do love it. It's hopefully I'll be able to live up to it. For those of you who are just tuning in and haven't really been keeping up on the previous episodes, Paul is a musician. His musical project, The Volume Remote, has provided our theme song in the past, and this is a completely original work that he produced specifically for the show, and it's pretty awesome. So hopefully this show can have some of that rub off onto me at least. So if you'd like to tell them about your musical project and where to find your music, and are we going to expect this one coming out for release anytime?
Oh, wow, a plug. Well, I'd really like some hair plugs, preferably ones that don't look like little ant legs. But as far as an actual plug that I can give away, well, let me answer your question. I was actually thinking, I guess I might as well share it here now, live for you. I'm going to release that with the CGG. I think I'm just going to call it, CGG theme, something. I'm going to release that as a ringtone. I've never released a ringtone before, so I don't know really what to expect. But it's short. It fits the criteria. I made a slightly extended version. Nothing new. It's just one more bar basically. That's like 28 seconds. So I figure I'll put that out as a ringtone on iTunes and all that, and I'll make it available for free on my website as all the other music is. Right, and plugging that website is thevolumeremote.com. You can find everything for free. Otherwise, you can find me on Spotify and iTunes, and Google Play, Amazon, YouTube, etc., etc.
Sweet. Awesome. All right. So now let's get to the episode. We promised last time, however many weeks ago that's been now, that we were going to talk about sequels, best, worst, and various other topics related to sequels, I guess. Sorry, did I ever mention how little I prepare for these things?
I just can't believe how much time has gone by since the last episode. It's been forever. I barely remembered that we were talking about this.
Oh man, yeah, rub it in, why don't you? So yeah, we were talking about sequels when we were supposed to be talking about remakes, but now we decided to actually talk about sequels. So let's so first of all, let's take it away. What for you qualifies as a great sequel?
As a great sequel, all right. I would say something that furthers the storyline, further develops the characters, the immersion, things like this. Something that's it doesn't have to be necessary. Not all sequels are, unless you leave us on a cliffhanger, of course. But just something that's going to add to it, as opposed to like, oh, well, this one sold X amount of figures, so let's pump out another one brainlessly.
True.
So yeah, something passionate, I suppose. How about you?
I was actually thinking about this in the many weeks that it has been since our last show. And I was actually thinking that, applying a lot of the criteria that I use for sequel movies that I do for sequel games, in that it has to continue the previous installment in a profound way. So basically, it can't really be a standalone game, or at least not to the same effect as if you had played the previous games or game before it. So I'm going to get this right out of the way. These games are amongst my absolute top favorite games of all time, and so I'm going to give them an honorable mention because these are great games that happen to be sequels rather than actually being particularly great sequels, because they are great games that you can just jump right into and not even really have to care particularly if you played the ones before. And those ones, just very quickly, are Ultima 7, Fallout 2, and Saints Row 2 through 4. Great games, some of my favorites. You've heard me mention them here before, but they're great, absolute great games, some of the greatest of all time that happen to be sequels, but they're not necessarily but their predecessors aren't essential to the experience of playing that game. And I think that's kind of what I look for in a sequel, is not only just a great continuation, but the predecessor has to be an essential part of the experience.
That's a really good point. I'm here nodding my head like people can see it, including yourself. But no, that's a really good point. It's something that not only doesn't rely on the first, like you said, so you could just kind of jump right in, not necessarily linear, and just stand on its own. That's a really good point. And yeah, I completely agree. And I think sequels get in trouble when they are like the antithesis, when they start to go in this completely different direction that makes you feel less connected to who you thought you were. And by that, I mean, the character itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that made sense. I'm not so good at thinking.
I think you're saying that a game is not a great sequel if it spirals you into an existential crisis?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's my reading out of what you just said. So I may or may not have been entirely paying attention, because I was glancing at my notes at that time, but I'm pretty sure I heard you correctly.
Yeah, at this point, I'm not even sure what I said to begin with, but I do like what you said better, so you nailed it.
Okay. We're already starting to run out of time, so let's get into this. Okay, let's start with, what's your favorite sequel or sequels? What are, just throw out the awesome ones right off the bat.
Right. So these aren't going to be extremely original or hipstery, really unique. You probably never heard of it, but here we go. First and foremost, I have to mention James Pond 2.
Okay. I haven't heard that name in a really long time.
I may or may not mean that. No, I for some reason it just popped to me when I was writing notes. I remember as a kid I liked that game for like 6 minutes, which is a long time as a kid, and I remember I remember playing the first one, being disappointed. I'm not sure how it holds up. I ain't played it in 2 decades. But on more serious note, first and foremost, as I've discussed before in this podcast, Police Quest 2.
Oh, that was one of mine.
Oh, lovely.
Yes.
And also sorry, because now,
That's fine, that's fine. I have more. I have more than one sequel that I like.
Every now and then I've got a list of like 3 things, and you mention one, I'm like, shite, now I'm done at 2. But yeah, Police Quest 2 was brilliant. I'm not sure how important the first one plays into it. I mean, it is the same.
Oh, incredibly. Right. It's a continuation of the story. I'm not sure exactly how you can play Police Quest 2 without at least knowing the events of Police Quest 1.
Right, exactly. With Jesse Baines. And I guess at the same time, giving it merit is if you hadn't played Police Quest 1, you'd at least get the vibe that, like, okay, this person has escaped. You obviously have a history of them, and you got to catch them. So, if you happen to have played it before the first one, it probably wouldn't be the worst thing. But no, I loved it. I mean, Police Quest 1 has a special place in my heart, based on nostalgia, I guess you'd say. But Police Quest 2 just completely nailed it. I love the music. Love everything about it, except for maybe Keith, your partner in the game, who does nothing the whole time. All he does is go and smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
Got to watch myself because there's a different word for it out here.
Yes. Yes, please do not use that word.
No, God, no. And I love everyone, so I'd never want to offend anybody. But dear God, I had a culture shock the first time I went to a petrol station in the States and asked for a pack. Jesus Christ. Almost got crucified.
Oh, that's better.
Oh no, let's not do that thing from a few episodes ago where I just start burying myself.
Okay. Anyways.
I'm pulling up on the rudders here. So yeah, no, Police Quest 2 is awesome. Love the music, love the story. Again, the Japanese artwork I do actually prefer, but either way, it's a great game. On down my list here, which isn't very long, is Monkey Island 2. Got to mention Monkey Island 2 because it seems like the general populace, the consensus, whatever, seems to almost like 2 better than 1. Which
I've heard that quite a bit.
Right, yeah, same here. It kind of same vibe as Police Quest for me. Police Quest 2 for me personally, where it just does everything the first one did and perhaps even a little bit better. So got to mention that. They're both lovely games. I love them both. I really honestly couldn't pick, but that's definitely one of the great sequels. Next one on the list is Day of the Tentacle.
Oh, good one.
Thank you, mate. And that's yeah, I mean, I think it's a proper sequel. It's always been kind of tongue-in-cheek, like, you know, whether it's a spiritual successor, sequel, whatever, but you know, we I don't have my thesaurus. Whoa. I didn't know I had a lisp until now. But anyway, you know, regardless, for argument's sake, is what I'm trying to say. We can call it a sequel. That game's absolutely brilliant. And then finally on my list is The Dagger of Amon-Ra, or Larbo 2.
Right. Which, I mean, I and again, Dagger of Amon-Ra is one of my, you know, every game is one of my favorites. I love Dagger of Amon-Ra. I love it to pieces. But again, I think for me, that's one that kind of qualifies as a great game that happens to be a sequel more so than a great sequel, just because it's kind of, it stands alone, I would say. I don't think you necessarily need to have played the Colonel's Bequest to really get everything you need out of the Dagger of Amon-Ra. But I mean, it, you know, as far as games that happen to be sequels, it is definitely great.
No, absolutely, and you're absolutely right. It's a you know, antithesis of the first one, right? It heads in a completely different direction. You know, obviously, murder mystery still prevails, but I mean, everything from the art direction. I think the biggest thing for me that stood out as it being different is that the lighting. You know, it doesn't have this dark, gloomy lighting. It's quite a bright game actually. But yeah, they could have just changed the name to, you know, Jane Doe, whatever, and released it as its own game, and you would have been fine with it. Like, you know, it's not necessarily even low or above the second one, but regardless, you know, that's how it's titled, and I do love it. So, yeah, for a bit of a twist on the first few, I'll go with that one.
If anything, I find it kind of like absurdly amusing when you do think about the fact that she was the main character from the Colonel's Bequest, because it's like, wow, everywhere she goes, people just die in large quantities. I do not want her as a friend, because it seems like, you know, any situation that she can get into, you're going to be trapped and you're going to be killed.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Something's got to be wrong with me. Like, you know, trap me in a place with a serial killer 2 times while I'm still in my 20s. Maybe I'm kind of drawing that kind of crowd. I don't know.
And you know, psychologically speaking, I'm suddenly feeling like, you know what, I can fix her.
Well, I think psychologically speaking, she's very, like, unscarred by any of this going on. She just kind of really brushes off the fact that, like, everyone, including her everyone is dead, including her best friend. And she's like, oh, well, gonna move on with my life. It's all good.
That's so true. She's so delightfully naive, even more so in the second one. Yeah, you're right.
But still, like I said, it is a sequel by every and all sense of the word. It's a great game, but I don't know if I'd consider it one of the great sequels so much as a great game that happens to be a sequel. That's my personal take on that.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, like I say, you know, they could have just left Laura Bowes out of the title whatsoever. Not that she's in the official title, but they could have left that whole thing aside, and it would have stood on its own as just a fine game.
I would say, in response to the fact that you've already mentioned Police Quest 2, I'll carry on a similar vein and say probably one of my favorite sequels would have to be Space Quest 3. Because, I mean, funny enough, I actually did play Space Quest 3 before playing Space Quest 2, and sure, I did have a lot of fun out of it, but regardless, there was a lot that I had to catch up on to understand what was going on. Yeah, I didn't know because I hadn't played Space Quest 2. I had to have somebody tell me why my ship was floating around, who is this robot that's chasing me and why, and all that sort of thing. So it did really carry on. It brought over a lot of elements from Space Quest 2. It is a direct continuation. It takes place exactly where Space Quest 2 leaves off. And it was also a great game. It was an improvement in pretty much all ways. I'm not even... Space Quest 2 was a good game. I guess because I don't really have the nostalgic attachment to it, I'm not really that connected to it. But Space Quest 3 is like killer. It's like one of the best Sierra games that I can think of.
I absolutely agree, and just to further your note, I love the entire series. It's my favorite series. So I love 2 as well. But 2 made a mistake that I see happen a lot in movies and such, where you have such a great idea for something, such a lovely background and everything, and then you spend so much of the time like in the jungle, and it's like, what is a space game, mate? There's so much you can do with space. It is the great unknown, the infinite, and then you end up spending like half the game in like a garden or whatever. So mistakes were made, I think. I still like 2, but you're absolutely right. 3 is just, they completely hit the nail on the head.
Space Quest 2, Vohal's backyard.
Now with more monkey men.
But yeah, no, I mean, that's a really good point, and I never even thought about that. There was just something that just didn't quite grab me about Space Quest 2, even when I did play it. Granted, it was quite a few years later, but yeah, I mean, it was... I think Space Quest 3 kind of retroactively made Space Quest 2 better.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's almost like eating your veg and then having dessert. Like, having gotten through 2 and then you hit 3, like, all right, now it's opening wide up.
So I guess in terms of best sequels, I would have to say, based entirely on the criteria of, continuing a series forward, I'd probably have to say all of the sequels of the Blackwell series.
Oh, nice.
Again, fantastic games, each and every single one of them. Each one kind of does something a little bit different from the previous. But honestly, it is an ongoing story, and each of them, I should say, the first one was pretty standalone, and they just kept going with it. And, each one of them could technically be standalone, but they really do build off of the lore that was established by the previous games in the series until it culminates in, I think Epiphany was the last one, where it really just brings it all together, and it just makes it so satisfying to have been on this entire journey across however it's been like 5 games or something like that. It was a really great payoff. Every single game kind of like builds and builds off of the games that came before it. And so I would say that, the only game that can't count in that is the first one because it's not a sequel. Everything else are perfect sequels.
Oh, I'm very envious of your choice there. You've done a good thinking right there. That was really, really good choice.
Okay, so we've done the best. How about the worst?
How about the worst, indeed? All right, so my worst gets a little bit muddy, so I'm gonna try and get through it as professionally as I can, because I think by now I'm well known
as you can.
Right. Yeah, everyone knows me to be professional,
as we
organized.
Can. As professional as this show can ever possibly be in the state that it's currently in.
I feel like people that have listened from day one to now is like, oh, here's where Paul fucks it all up now. Here we go.
Worst sequels is every subsequent episode of this show.
Oh God, it's so true. Julia did set a high bar for all of us right off the bat there. All right, so worst sequels. All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and muck it up. Here we go. Okay. So short answer for the first one is Gabriel Knight 3.
Okay.
I wasn't a fan of the graphic style. The story, it was really hard to follow because the puzzles were ridiculous and relentless. I just wasn't a fan of it. I mean, almost like the Laura Bow comparison, but in a complete, negative. Like how do we get here? Like this isn't the same vibe, ain't the same, even Gabriel that we know. So I put Gabriel Knight 3, but here's where I'm going to muck it up and not, probably lose some friends. All right. So I love Gabriel Knight 2. And here's how you know trouble's coming.
Uh-oh.
I love FMV. I really do. I mean both those sentiments. It's just that I found with Gabriel Knight 2 that, compared to the first game, I was so immersed in that game, so in love with that game. When I played Gabriel Knight 2 for the first time, I felt immediately kind of disconnected. It was just like, it was a shocking switch. It was like being slapped in the face by a cold dead fish. Like just this complete shock of like, all right, there goes everything I thought Gabriel was, and now here's this guy's face, and I think I've seen them a lot on Friends or some show like that. And I lost immersion because the art direction changed so drastically. Now, that being said, I don't regret it. I'm glad it was released. I love the story of Beast Within. I love FMV games. I just kind of think, maybe Beast Within should have been the third one, and like, maybe just a different, something to kind of just transition a little bit smoother. You know that I don't like when people announce transitions. But it was just a shock, and I think a lot of this is coming from just how much I cherished that first game, and going into the second one just completely just polar opposite as far as the style and everything was just kind of weird. So I like the game a lot, but I guess in a perfect world, what I'm trying to say is, keep Gabriel Knight 1 as it is. Maybe take the story from Gabriel Knight 3 and make it, kind of a pixel art, whatever style for 2, and then Beast Within for 3, something like that. Just something to kind of ease me into FMV out of the style of the first one.
That's a pretty cool point. If you think you're gonna get some heat over that, I just haven't even played any of the Gabriel Knight games, even though I hear nothing but fantastic things about at least the first two, and some underdog sentiments for the third one. I really just never got around to it. They were kind of a little bit late in the game for me. I was just not really playing a whole heck of a lot at the time that it came out.
Right. No, and that's a great keyword you just said, late in the game, because bear in mind to those listening, I didn't play these games as they came out. I played them once they were all released. So to me, it was kind of like, the modern version of binge watching on Netflix, where I played the first one and was so excited to dive into the second one. And perhaps that's why it was such a shock. Whereas if, you played them as they came out in the mid-90s, you would have plenty of time to, you waited a couple of years and they come out with an FMV and you're like, all right, this is awesome. So that being said, I think that kind of did change my perception of it, where I was able to play them back to back, and that kind of added this just kind of weird, ice ball to the ear, shocking change that it went through.
Right.
But so anyway, I've only got one more for worst sequels, which I'm surprised. I'm usually pretty good being negative. This is again going to be slightly unpopular, but I don't like King's Quest 2.
I have to kind of agree with that. Not that King's Quest 2... sorry, I'm going to let you explain this first before I get into it.
All right, well, don't forget what you're going to say. I'm interested. So I get it. It was really necessary to have 2, because that's how Graham meets Rosella, who's obviously a key player in the whole series. So I get it. That was necessary, but
I don't think he met Rosella in the second one.
Didn't they get married at the end?
I'm pretty sure Rosella is his daughter.
Oh, that'd be really awkward. Yeah, that's some real down south sort of stuff there. I'm not sure. I'm at southern UK. All right, don't get offended, people. That's where I'm from. No, all right. So if that's the case, then yeah, just the whole thing can kind of fuck off. But
we removed the one thing that justified it.
Yeah, basically, because I was going to say up until that point that may or may not exist, probably not, because you know what's going on much better than I do. It felt like that whole game was like DLC content for the first one, like just a bunch of like extended missions on the first one. It was kind of just tedious and painful, like just going through the same rhetoric. So yeah, I don't know. I wasn't a fan of it. It was kind of honestly. It felt like work. Like I was just trying to get through it so that I could stay linear with the storyline and play 3, 4, etc. in order. Otherwise, I probably would have bailed. Like if there was only 2 King's Quests, I wouldn't have made it through it. I only muscled through it to get to the third one. So yeah, wasn't a fan of that one.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said myself, I also kind of agree. I didn't even actually have that on my list, but I fully agree with pretty much everything you said except for Rosella. Because that's just factually incorrect, so I can't agree with that. For me, like I only just played it like a few months ago. Like I'm not sure. I don't think it's even been a year since I played King's Quest 2, and that was like the first time I played it. And I was just, I was full swing in this whole retro classic gaming kick. So I was just chomping at the bit to play a brand new to me AGI game because, Police Quest was the first and Space Quest. And, I loved AGI Quest games because I haven't played very many. So there's so many that are just so new to me. And I played King's Quest 2 pretty much because I was forced to. But I played it and, there was the whole novelty of these graphics are awesome because they're really, stabbing me in my nostalgia nerve. And it was in a good way. That was great. But it just felt so empty, too. It was just sort of, it was the Rocky 2 of the series. Pretty much like you said, it kind of enabled more and better games. But it itself kind of was, it was okay. It was fine. The best I could say for it was relatively easy. I didn't have to spend too much time playing it to finish it. But it was kind of, it was... Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to really put it into words because like I said, I didn't think of this beforehand. I'm only talking about it because you mentioned it and I kind of realized that I agree with you. So I can't really put it into a whole lot of an in-depth insight other than just saying about it didn't do anything for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can't even. Not a deep thinker, but it seemed like I guess the best analogy I could say is like download content, like DLC. Like hey, if you like King's Quest 1 and you want to play more of it, here's like another level or two with a bunch of doors and mystical people or whatever. Didn't really stand on its own unless he did marry his daughter, in which I'll find it extremely interesting. And Graham, you're in a lot of trouble, you naughty boy. That is illegal in most states.
Okay, so I guess for me it was pretty easy to figure out the worst sequel ever because it also happens to be one of the worst games ever, but also a terrible sequel. In fact, the fact that it's such a terrible sequel is what is like about a good 30% of why this is one of the worst games of all time, and it is Ultima 9 Ascension. It is just... As much as people can rightfully complain about Ultima 8, at least Ultima 8 bothered to take place after the events of Ultima 7 Part 2. I know the numbering scheme's a little bit weird there, but Ultima 7 Part 2 ends in a certain way, and Ultima 8 picks up where it left off. And then Ultima 8 ends in a certain way, and Ultima 9 completely ignores it. And it just completely breaks every single connection to the previous game. It brings back characters without understanding the point of those characters. It's just a horrible game. It's an ugly game. It doesn't play well. And it just completely only acknowledges the previous games and references enough to know how to ruin them completely. Like, it only knows things by name so it knows that it should that it should reference these things and people and places and all that sort of thing, but not enough to actually be consistent with anything that has happened before. And it's so weird because there's certain events that they reference that you can't possibly just not know what happened. There's a very main character throughout the series that died in a previous installment in a very pivotal moment of the game. And the game acknowledges that, but completely dismisses exactly why it happened or what happened after, and just says, like, okay, well, we know that he's dead and you can bring him back. And it's like, well, you know, if you bring him back, you're pretty much going to destroy the universe, right? Spoilers. But they're just like, we don't actually have to remember anything about the previous games other than a few vague references. And also be a shitty game on top of that. So it was just like this whole culmination of everything that could possibly go wrong with not only just a sequel, but a game in general. And it was just the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, it sounds like sloppy, lazy writing. Reminds me of we talked about a few episodes ago. Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, where they just throw like a really quick reference into a previous character as to be like, see, we know the universe, now moving on, go shoot people. Where it's like, that doesn't really make it part of the series, mate. You gotta,
And the problem with Ultima 9 is because, you refer to it as lazy writing, and I partially agree with that, but the problem with Ultima 9 is that it gets to the point where I'm not even sure if lazy writing can justify that, because it almost seems like they're actively trying to screw things up. It seems like they're sitting around with their parchment and quill and being all like, how can we take something and completely screw it up for everybody? And it was just... I don't know, I'm such a big fan of the previous games. Even Ultima 8, which I admit was flawed, I still got some enjoyment out of it, even though I'm aware of its flaws. I'm very, very aware of its flaws, but I still kind of enjoyed parts of it. And Ultima 9 was just so... It was the world that I really, really wanted to get back to, because we'd gone 2 full games without going to Britannia, which is where Ultima 6 and Ultima 7 took place. And that's pretty much where I started. The series was Ultima 6. I really wanted to get back into that, into that world and continue that on. And then they threw me back in just to ruin it. And it was so disappointing. Okay. So, were there any others that you had on your worst list? Because that's pretty much the only one that I was able to think of off the top of my head. It was hard for me to think of horrible sequels just because, I don't know. I mean, there are some games that are actually not that bad, even though they weren't the greatest sequels. And there's some games that were pretty good sequels, but, I can't think of anything that was so irredeemably bad in most sequels that I've played. The worst I could even say is just like a complete shift. And even then they shifted from something good to something also good, just different. So really, Ultima 9 was the only one I could really think of that was just like complete flat out, just a big middle finger to the fans.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with your overall sentiment of trying to find a game that's just that bad that it should be walk through town while we chant shame. There really wasn't anything. Looking at the series between Lucas and Sierra and all the adventure games, etc. Like there was some weaker points, like Space Quest 2, but I still loved it. You know what I mean? So yeah, other than just some weaker points, like there was really nothing that was horrible. Even the ones I mentioned. So yeah, I was surprised. I thought I'd have a lot more for sequels, but when I really looked at them.
Yeah,
so
but
much.
for that matter, are there any games that you think or series particularly that you think they really should have just stopped it a little bit sooner?
That's a really good point. The only 2 things that come to mind, I should say, are honestly games I haven't played. So I'll go ahead and just, like Ace Ventura, just bend over and speak with me ass. I hear constantly a lot of vitriol for King's Quest 8. I only made it to 6 myself, so it was just based on consensus. It seems like specifically 8 individually, it just maybe sounds like the fans didn't want that one. And then the other for me is because of how much I love Police Quest 1, 2, and 3, I wasn't super... I would have just preferred 4, 5, 6, whatever, to be in the same spirit of the first 3, as opposed to moving on to that SWAT formula that they
Yeah.
did. I'm not saying the SWAT games are bad at all. I don't hear bad things about them. I just personally, Larry, Space Quest, King's Quest, etc., Quest for Glory, they all got, good 5, 6, whatever titles. Would have been nice for Police Quest to have gotten the same amount of titles in the same vein. And maybe SWAT coming later or being on the side.
Yeah.
But
Did Police Quest Open Season, was that called Police Quest 4, or was it just Police Quest Open Season? Like, was it counted as being in that canonical series?
oh, you know what? I think you're right, mate. I think it was 4. I always kind of group it with the SWAT games just because it changed it for me.
It totally
anyway,
changed the tone of it all, yeah.
right, exactly. And went from what Jim Walls to Daryl something, or maybe vice versa. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it started with Jim Walls, and then Daryl Gates did number 4.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's just you could feel the change in leadership. Just seemed like a different game. There's another game out there called Blue Force, which I thought was quite a good game. Would have fit almost better as Police Quest 4. But no, good catch. You're right. That was the fourth one.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure, if my memory recalls, I think Blue Force was actually a Jim Walls game. I just don't think it was with Sierra.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Mr. Walls must have worked some magic.
Mm-hmm. But going back to SWAT, they were good games for what they were. I don't know why they needed to put them as Police Quest, because they weren't Police Quest. They were just,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good point. That's another one which I didn't have on my list, so I'm just kind of like speaking in response here. But Police Quest 1, Police Quest 2, Police Quest 3, they felt like quest games. I didn't play Police Quest 4. I heard it's actually not bad on its own merits. I don't know, another controversial title. But, the trilogy, at least, were quest games in a police setting, whereas, which also kind of had a strict adherence to procedure. Whereas when it got to the SWAT point, I feel like it was pretty much just a training video or training program.
Right, like a simulation almost.
Yeah, exactly. A training simulator. That's all it really was. It kind of felt like it took the quest out of Police Quest. It should have just been, I don't know, SWAT. Just go with that. That's fine. I would have enjoyed it if you were just say, hey, this is something totally different.
See, and that's another really good point. You're right. I think part of me is impartial to those games just because they added the Police Quest brand to it, whereas if they left it off, if I approached it as an individual, I probably would have appreciated it, or aspects of it more. But you're right, because they put that name on it, which they didn't have to. It was like, yeah, and what you said kind of goes back to that point of most of the other Quest games from Sierra got at least 4 or 5 titles, and I would have loved to have seen Police Quest get the 4, 5, 6, whatever. It's just whatever they did, whatever number, just staying in the kind of, like you said, Quest type of vibe.
So I'm not sure if you're going to agree with me on this one. I think you're probably going to disagree with me on this one, because I think you mentioned it before pretty positively, but I think you'll probably at least understand where I'm coming from, because I think a game that really should have been left alone, that should have just been a standalone and just left to be basking in its perfection without a follow-up is, and I know this is like one of your top favorite games of all time, but it's my turn to mention it, is the Neverhood Chronicles. It should not have had the Armacrog, or it should have just been something completely different. It should have just been something else, and I should think they should have just left Neverhood alone and just let it be perfect on its own.
I completely agree. I actually almost put that on my list, and Armacrog, that is, because... well, actually, I should word it this way. I almost put it on my list as something I'd like to see, which we'll discuss in a moment. Sorry, we're doing a little Quentin Tarantino jumping around timelines with you guys. But no, I almost put it down. I'd like to see a Neverhood 2, and then I remembered, oh wait, they made Armacrog, and I was kind of bummed about it for a second because one, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't really want them to even make a Neverhood 2. Just leave it. It was perfect the way it was. There was no loose ends. Everything was just perfect. But yeah, once they made the Armacrog, yeah. No, I completely agree, and even furthermore, to step one back from Armacrog, you had the Skull Monkeys and whatever. I mean, I'm not like a real platformer type of person. I do like them and play a few of them, but that wasn't my style of game, so I could and can do without it. So yeah, I completely agree, actually.
Okay, so if we narrow this down a little bit, are there any games that are currently standalone that people ask for a sequel that you think would be a horrible decision?
You know what? Probably. Do you have any you could go first with?
Yeah, absolutely. I've thought of, I've mentioned this so many times and I wholeheartedly stand behind this as like the one single person that holds this opinion. But people keep going on about how much they wanted a sequel to Loom, and I am just like, no, never. Never make a sequel to Loom. And they're like, oh, but it wouldn't be a direct sequel, it'd just be in the same universe. Like, no, just leave it. It was perfect as it was. But the ending didn't really touch. No, it was exactly perfect. It was fine. Don't touch it. It was a perfect game. No sequels.
Oh my god. Sorry, I coughed up a lung halfway through that. That was... So that kind of passion, I'd like to think, is inspired by the new intro. That was beautiful.
Well, thank you for that.
I see your little vocal meter starting to hit yellow and red. I'm like, yeah, it's the anger. All right. Start a revolution with that type of fury. Yeah, no, all right, I'll put it this way. I would 100,000% agree with you 30 minutes ago.
Oh, no.
Literally 30 minutes ago. But when I was trying to come up with ideas for sequels that I'd like to see, which again, Tarantino, you're going to hear about that in a second, but I might as well spoil one now. One of the ones I put on there was Loom. Sorry. The reason I did is because I just to refresh my memory, I quickly Googled the ending just to watch it again. And I was like, yeah, actually, that's fine. Like you said, I mean, there's nothing, really no loose ends. I mean, you could always pick something in a universe of characters to whatever, but
there are literal loose ends at the end of the game because they tore the fabric of the universe. There are literal loose ends that are meant to be there.
That was so beautifully put. I'm not sure I want to continue with my assessment.
And sorry, if I can continue on my little rant here for a second, it's also, I also did because somebody mentioned to me, like, okay, it's fine to have a bittersweet ending, but they ended just so miserably that, you can't just leave it alone. So I did go back to refresh my memory because it's been like a long time since I've played all the way through to the end. So I watched exactly the whole end sequence of Loom, and yeah, it is really depressing. And it is sort of like, okay, well, there's half the universe of people who are just left alone with chaos that's going to ruin their lives, but we can still save half, and that's something. I'm like, yeah, do that. That's the ending. You're going to repair the one half that can be saved, and unfortunately, the other half is doomed, and that's the ending. That's great. Like, it's a horrible, sorry, not horrible, but horribly bittersweet ending. More bitter than sweet, I'll be honest. But there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great ending.
You're absolutely right. For some reason, people, myself sometimes included, like, you want this fluffy, comforting blanket of warmth put over you at the end, like,
Yeah, most of the time I do.
Right, yeah, you get this feeling like, if I don't see him hook up with her, I won't actually know, but I sort of know it's implied. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, sometimes there is something kind of beautiful about it. And let's face it, I mean, compared to the real world, and I know games are meant to escape that, obviously, but compared to the real world, having half that you can save is actually, like, a huge win. So, it's really not that bad at all. And I guess, once again, your silky smooth voice and talking is making me change my mind. But I will say this, when I looked up the video, it led me down a small rabbit hole to find out that they were trying for many years to make a sequel.
That's right, yeah.
And it's called Forge. A matter of fact, they only got chapter 1 done. It's freeware, and it's on forgegame.com or Forge Game, because the other one's a different website. Forgegame.com, you can get chapter 1. And it was done in kind of apocalyptic, cities in ashes, blah, 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 as you'd expect, like you said, from the ending of it, of how things go awry. And so the more I was reading about it, I was starting to get interested, like, well, fuck, now I kind of want to see what they're going to do with this. Like, that it might actually be interesting. But, again, you've really swayed me because even even as I look at that forged sample, the screenshots, when I still look at them, I mean, like, in my head, it didn't look like Loom. It looked more like Unavowed, which is lovely, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but,
of course.
But yeah, I mean, it wasn't in the spirit of Loom whatsoever. I mean, it was just completely different, you know. I would almost feel like you need like 6 or 7 sequels if you're really going to go down this like Stephen King The Stand type of route with that game. Like, either, you know, leave it where it's at, or buckle in for, like, you know, 40 more hours of this. So yeah, you swayed me. I changed my mind.
I would say if I was to sum this up a bit, I would say that games that should be left alone are classic games. The easiest way I could put this is there should be a statute of limitations on when you're allowed to make a sequel to something.
Right.
Once it reaches a point, you're dooming it to fail, because you're either going to be too new for the people who wanted the old, or you'll be too old for people who want something new, and you're never going to win.
That was beautifully put. Was that a haiku?
No, that's clearly not a haiku. Do you even know what a haiku is?
I don't. I can't even spell the word haiku.
I mean, like, and it's one, and like I said, we talked about reboots. I'm not saying that they shouldn't reboot something if they think it's a wise decision, and if it is a wise decision, but a sequel, you shouldn't do a sequel at this point, especially not in a video game. A movie, you can maybe justify it a little bit. It was not justified in Indiana Jones 4, but but you know, you can kind of see where some of those things might have a bit of an idea behind it. But with video games, there's a statute of limitations. Just don't. And I think Valve has outlasted all of them with their games.
No, you're exactly right. I can't put it any better than you did with the new old kind of comparison. You know, you're gonna piss off, you know, more than not, basically, and the ones that you don't anger probably just won't be interested.
Yeah. Okay, so to invalidate everything that we just said here, what are some games that you think really needed some sequels?
Initially, I was going to put on. Basically, I crossed off Dagger von Monroe. In the sense, I was like, well, I'd like to see more Laura Bows, but honestly, we've got that covered. You know, very unlovely Julie is working on something that's you know, in the vein of that, and so we're good to go there. That's covered. Thank you, Julia.
No, sorry, we have to do a proper plug for that. Our friend Julia Minamata, who was on our very first episode of this podcast, is working on a fan game. She's like a single developer author of a tribute game, the Crimson Diamond with Nancy Maple. It's very much in the spirit, in the aesthetic of the Colonel's Bequest. It looks amazing. There's a playable demo you can find of it online. It plays really well. There's a lot, you know, it's very early. Not early, but you know, I mean, it's like it's far from completion at this point. There's a lot of placeholder segments and screens, but it's coming along nicely, and it's worth checking out and following and hoping that it'll see it through to the end. But anyways, going back to Laura Bow, did you have anything to say about that before I do? Because you're probably going to hate me once I get to my point about this.
So no, and I'll just add to that I've had the pleasure and honor to play through the demo, and it's unbelievable. You absolutely love it. So definitely check it out at her website. But no, go ahead with your comment.
Okay, so now after I inadvertently made you remove Laura Bow from your list.
No, I know you're not.
Laura Bow is on my list of games that need more sequels.
What the?
Because, hear me out on this, I don't think they should all necessarily be murder mysteries. I think she should just go on this sleuthing spree where things happen. Like, you know, I mentioned before as a, you know, one of my examples, like, you know, maybe there's like a jewel heist that she has to figure out, or, you know, some, you know, all these different explorations of different mysteries and detective stories, but they don't all have to be and then there were none style, you know, drop dead till there's the killer left kind of story. I think that would be a great way to continue the series if they were to have. I wish that they did. You know, like I said, statute of limitations. I don't want them to necessarily do that now. Although, all things considered, that's probably one of the better ones that I'd be able to see having some validity to it, but generally, at the time, if they came out with some more games, I would have liked them to have done so. Just, we had 2 games of, and then there were none, drop dead serial killings. We could go on to explore more different kinds of mysteries from there. And that's why it's on the list, even though I made you strike it off your list of best sequels.
I'm still just slowly shaking my head in disappointment. I feel like a nan over here. Why'd you do that to me, darling? Fuck, right on off. That was unbelievable. I'd like to see for Larbo 3, like you said in the beginning of the episode, like, you know, like murder always follows her. Like maybe Larbo 3 could be like Laura goes to a day spa, or Laura goes to a psychologist because she's bottling it all up. Something like that. Laura goes on a cruise.
I think it'd be great if like there was a Laura Bow game where she's going around, she's like locked in this place, people are dying around her, and it turns out that it's because like she keeps making these mistakes that lead to other people dying, and it turns out that she was inadvertently killing them this entire time. Like, you know, she's doing all these like typical point and click adventure game puzzles where you like, you know, use the banana to lure the monkey to get this object, and then later on someone will slip on the banana peel and fall downstairs and break their neck. We're like, oh no, a murder! What's going on here?
Leaving like her notebook and clues out, like making people doubt the other people in the house. They'll turn on each other like animals.
Yes, and it turns out all this entire time, it'd be great if you can even retroactively sort of like, you know, retcon and see like everything in the previous 2 games were her fault as well. I think that would be amazing.
And then at the end of the game, she's just like in a padded cell rocking back and forth as the camera pans out. That'd be beautiful. Oh my God.
How about you? Let's give you a shot at the mic for a bit.
I created a monster with that theme song, I swear. So let's see. Okay, so sequels I'd like to see. I've got, for a serious one, I've got The Dig. The Dig. There's another one where I was kind of basically just staring at my boxes trying to think of something, and so just like Loom, I looked up the ending to refresh my memory, and it definitely ends abruptly. Like it ends where the human, I forgot the name, so the 2 different species, let's just say one's human, are talking, and they spend the last 4 minutes of the game talking about how the humans are going to come to that planet, how they're going to meet up again, and then it just kind of ends. So I feel like that would actually be a nice game to see a sequel to, you know, see what humans, it's probably, you know, kind of a tired idea of what humans do with too much intelligence and power, blah, 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 but, you know, maybe not so much video games as movies, so it might be interesting to see. And I guess my point is that it kind of set it up for a sequel and then just didn't. And I think there was rumors that they were toying around with one, but it never happened. So yeah, Dig would be something I'd like to see. The first one was so... God, I love and hate that game. Like, there's very few games I feel that way about. Like, I just love the story. I love the art. I just hated the puzzles and just certain things about it. Voice acting was a little dodgy sometimes. So, yeah, I'd like to see a sequel. Not a remake, but a sequel on that one.
Yeah. And I guess, do you have any others to throw in just before I get my last point?
I do. I'd like this is pure fantasy. Well, I guess most of this is. It would have been really cool to see Lucas style, whatever, do Indiana Jones, Raiders, and Temple of Doom.
Oh, that's a good one.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, the way you said "ooh" into the microphone was quite bassy and lovely. It would have been. I was thinking about Indy. I'm like, well, that's not how Indy works. He doesn't do sequels. Like, you can't do Fate of Atlantis 2. It's always just this is Indy and this adventure. So then I thought, well, hell, we got Crusade. I love that game. Obviously, love Atlantis. So why not do a Raiders and a Temple of Doom? I think they'd both be amazing. I think I like Raiders maybe a little bit more. They're kind of tied for me, but I do think Temple of Doom would probably be the better video game, just more.
Yeah, it definitely feels a lot more game-ish style.
Right. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. And then the other thing I got is Full Throttle, which I thought was interesting. Again, just doing a little bit of Googling over the past few weeks or so. Heavy on the also. There was actually 2 sequels they were working on, and they both got scrapped.
Oh no!
So like. Yeah, so in the mid '90s, and you can hear a lot of interviews with the creator of the original one, Tim Schafer, right?
That's right.
Where he basically, realized that he needed to leave and start Double Fine because he heard they were working on Full Throttle 2, and he's like, well, that's my game, and then in his own head he's like, well, I guess it's not, it's Lucas's game, so they can do that. Maybe I should start my own business. So anyway, so he had mentioned they were working on one, and that kind of led me to be like, whatever happened to that? And it was supposed to be called, let's see, Full Throttle Payback was the title. And basically, they were working on it. It was doing pretty well. And then they pulled a bunch of resources out of it to focus on the dig, which I think was in a bit of trouble at the time, was taking too long. So a bunch of people left that project to help with the dig and never got back to it. And then in like 2002 or something, they put together another one called Hell on Wheels, and that was going to be 3D, and it was supposed to, they went as far, at least in a press release, they went as far as to say it was going to be on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, console as well, in other words, and that one just kind of withered out too. So, based on the original game, can I say I need a sequel? The first one, I like it very much. It was a bit short, be nice. I don't necessarily need another one, but now that I know that there was, at least two more actually in the works by Lucas, be kind of cool if somebody could pick up on one of them stories and carry on with it. So I got that one. I think the most important one I've got is Space Quest 6. Talk about leaving you on with so many unanswered questions, and I, for one, it's not the most popular opinion, but I actually really love 6. I know a lot of people don't. I love the whole series. It's not my favorite in the series, but I really like it. And
I will admit, as a person who did not really care for that game, that it did a lot of things really well.
Right, it did. And actually, just to throw this out there for anyone listening, there's a really cool accessible debug mode where you can jump around and have a lot of fun. There's a lot of just really cool Easter eggs, and check out like spacequest.net. There's like really, really cool things on that game, that you can go and have fun with, like Gary Owens bloopers and things like this that didn't make it in the game. But anyway, that one leaves you on a complete, cliffhanger with his, the mother of his child, let's say, and what's going to happen between this new flame that he met and the woman that he already knows he's going to have a child with. How's that all play out? And then, as we spoke a little bit ago about the rights to things, and nowadays that's quite a complicated subject. The two guys from Andromeda, as I'm sure a lot of you know, have kickstarted successfully and been working on and are finally almost done with their new game called Space Venture. I'm going to buy it, I'm going to play it, and I'm sure I'm going to love it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. I really am. These guys are hilarious. They've got, the whole crew back together, the band back together, whatever. But had they had the rights, I think and hope that they would have just made Space Quest 7, because I think they more than anyone knows what a cliffhanger we were all left on. And so I guess this game kind of embodies everything that bothers me about how mucked up the copyright laws are, specifically over here, because it's just, me, I'd just love to see 7. It's so frustrating being left on like a 25-year cliffhanger and never getting answers. So there's Space Quest 6, and I think I'm done. That's all I got. I put what I even put here. What am I thinking? I put Willy Beamish 2, Willy hits puberty, which I think is just a giant kind of ad for the Dare campaign. Where Willy's forced to make the right decision the whole time and deal with new feelings. So yeah, I didn't end on a strong note.
I should also say, as much as I have been spouting, because everything is about hypocrisy for me. I'm just one big walk-in contradiction of myself. As much as I can say that, there's a statute of limitations and you shouldn't make sequels after certain things, but I do also support almost every fan creation, and therefore I do feel, I just remembered this, they just released not too long ago Return of the Tentacle, which is a fan-made sequel to Day of the Tentacle. Right. And it's, I understand it's a fan-made game, so it's free, so just go download it. It's, I haven't played it all the way through. I downloaded it, I turned it off for a bit. What I played was great. I'm not saying that I turned it off and stormed away, but it's, if you're a fan of Day of the Tentacle, it's definitely worth looking into, because it looks pretty slick so far.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I actually thought to mention that too and forgot to write it down. So the goldfish memory has failed me. But yeah, definitely check that out. Second and third, what he said. I played just a little bit for what time allowed, and it's really professionally done. And actually, one thing I had too, just stepping back to Space Quest 6, I'll keep this really short. Was I heard that the brilliant, lovely, hilarious and very talented Josh Mandel himself was working on a Space Quest 7 sort of fan game, but it was it got too much hype, too many people were talking about it, so therefore Activision heard about it and shut it down. I know, I was so sad to hear that, because hearing a fan game get shut down, that's always a bummer, but hearing that Josh Mandel obviously is done so much with Sierra, including working on Space Quest 6. I'll leave it there. I could go on and on with his work, but hearing that he was working on 7, I was so bummed out. Like, I wish I just never heard that, and I've done it to you lot, sorry, but
That's right, you were kind of breaking up there anyway, so maybe some people didn't hear quite what you said.
Good, yeah, I kept it cryptic. You have to decode the message.
It took out a couple vowels here and there, so maybe people won't quite clue in. But just on a finishing note here, I'm going to say that my last pick for sequels that I actually did really want and possibly needed, again, statute of limitations. I don't really want them to do it now unless it's a fan sequel, like a fan-made game. I mentioned in our last episode about Dungeon Siege mods to update Ultima 5 and Ultima 6. I think if somebody did something like Dungeon Siege or Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter's Nights, took one of those isometric RPGs, created a fan-made mod for it to have a third installment of the Dark Sun series, I think that really needed to be a trilogy. I think that's sort of one of the things that did end, but kind of not in a satisfying way, whether good or bad. It was just sort of like, this really felt like there should be one more. And considering it's a game that you can import your character from the previous game before that, and I feel that it really would have been great to have carried those characters on for another game. So if somebody made like a fan-made sequel for Dark Sun and somehow designed it so they could rip the stats and characters from your previous game and then allowed you to play something just slightly updated, not like totally modern, like something that would come out today, but something as a mod for something like Dungeon Siege, Baldur's Gate, or Neverwinter Nights, I think that would be just perfect. That would be something that I would fully support, especially if it's a fan creation made by fans of the Dark Sun series.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna get right behind that with you. If any of you listening out there, you're looking for a direction in life or motivation, go and do that mod. Yeah.
There you
How
go.
about that for authority?
And you will provide the electronic fight song music for it.
Exactly, absolutely for free.
Well, that concludes my list of things to talk about today. How about you?
Yes, that also concludes mine. I don't think I got nothing left to say. No, that's all my notes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming back to our show, assuming that you did. As it turns out, this is a special 1 hour plus episode. I didn't know that going into it, but there you go. Consider it a way to ring in the new year because we've had a few weeks off by now. It feels like it's been a long time since the last time we recorded something. But here we are, bigger and better episode. I'm not going to say we're going to keep it in this format, but it's a new year. Let's give us this one.
Right, go get stuck in traffic. You'll enjoy it.
There you go. Continuity. I like that.
All right, love you, mates. Don't do murder. I had to say it.
Of course.
Stay safe out there. Happy New Year.